All signs, this is the Mission and Goals podcast. Radio check, over. Hang in there, buddy. We've got you. You're not alone.
G'day, legends, and welcome to the Mission and Goals channel. I'm back with Dr. Matt Worthington for episode number 2 of a relationship series we're conducting. Hey, Matt, how are you?
Not too bad, mate. Not too bad at all.
How have you been lately?
Good. Had a busy week at work.
Yeah.
Always very lucky to do the job I do and get paid for it. Living the dream.
Today, we're going to delve into a little bit of childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping you would be able to answer a question for me a bit related to childhood trauma.
Yeah.
As part of my trauma healing, I've realised that a lot of my trauma is beliefs that were implemented back when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Through obviously being raised certain ways from my environment, society, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, how do I be grateful for those beliefs to get me through to now, but how do I also move past them now as an adult?
Okay. All right. Well, if we talk about initially how these beliefs may come about, okay. So I'll just illustrate this with a bit of a story, if you like. Okay, a bit of a make-up story. So if I said to adult Joel, right, how does this table come to be here? Like, let's say it's a wooden table, right? Wooden table, how does that come to be here, Joel? And an adult Joel would say to me, well, it's made of wood, and wood comes from trees grow in forests, and at some stage there would have been a guy with a chainsaw who would have gone in there, chopped down a tree, put it on the back of a truck, and taken the tree to a factory where it'd be shaped into a table, and then that table would be taken to wholesalers, and then a retailers, and that's where you would have bought it from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how would you know all of that stuff? How would the adult Joel know all that? Well, basically because of life experience, right? So you've had all these life experiences, which give you memories, and you draw on those memories to understand the current situation. Does that make sense? Okay. In addition, right, like a little part 2 to this as well, right? Human beings, probably like a lot of animals, don't like uncertainty. Probably it's a primitive thing, so if you're in the forest and you're normally walking through the forest and then a rock's moved. Why is that moved? Could it have been a snake? We don't like not knowing things, not knowing what's happened, right? Or why something has happened. So basically, there's just 2 bits there that I want people to be aware of. One, our adult self has lots of experiences which are stored in our memory, and we can use those experiences, those memorized experiences, to understand what's happening right now in the current moment, right? So that's how you know this coffee table got here, this wooden coffee table got here, because of your life experiences, right? And 2, we don't like uncertainty, maybe for some primitive reason. It could mean danger, right? Okay, now imagine 2-year-old version of yourself, right? And the 2-year-old version of yourself wanders into this room, and I ask 2-year-old Joel, how did this wooden coffee table get to be here? Well, 2-year-old Joel doesn't have the life experiences which are stored in the memory of an adult version of Joel, right? 2-year-old Joel just has very little life experience and very few memories, right? Plus, the brain doesn't like uncertainty. So when I ask 2-year-old Joel, how did this wooden coffee table get to be here? The brain comes up with the simplest of solutions because it doesn't have the experience, right, to say it came from a forest and da-da-da. And it also doesn't like uncertainty. So what's the most simplest solution it can come up with? 2-year-old Joel would say, my table. Meaning, I somehow made that happen. This is here because of me. I am responsible for this table. It happened because of me, right? So between the ages of 2 and 4, children believe, because they don't have the life experiences, right, and they haven't got that development yet, their brain just automatically defaults to, I made this thing happen. I made this thing somehow. It's like a form of magical thinking, right? And so that's why it's often people say 2 to 4 year olds believe they are the center of the universe, or egocentric, really, because they believe they have created everything in the universe. Another way of saying that is they believe they are responsible for everything in the universe. They believe everything that is happening in the universe is because of them. They've done it, right? They also believe that there's only one mind in the universe, and it's their mind. It's the 2-year-old mind. They don't know that other people have minds, right? So they believe they are responsible for everything in the world, and there's only one view in the world, and it's their view, right? Okay. So let's extend this wooden table example, right? Let's say a 2-year-old, just toddler, toddles into the living room and sees mum laughing at a funny movie, right, on TV. And the 2-year-old can't relate mum's laughter to the TV, right? Can't make that connection, right? In the 2-year-old, as far as the 2-year-old is concerned, the 2-year-old has made mum laugh, right? Because they believe they've made everything happen in the world, right? And they probably even think they've made the characters in the TV and everything in the living room, right? So the 2-year-old's feeling pretty good about himself, because he's just made his mum laugh, right? And if mum, just by sheer fluke, without knowing what's going on in the mind of the 2-year-old, just by sheer fluke, just happens to turn around and say, "Aren't you a good little boy?" Right? What she's just done unknowingly is just reinforced that false belief, because it is a false belief, right? Reinforced that false belief that the 2-year-old has that he's just caused a great thing. And that's pretty cool, because if there's lots of praise like that, in moments in that sort of magical age of 2 to 4, that false belief that I caused this good thing to happen is going to be cultivated and strengthened, and that person will grow into a secure adult who doesn't need to prove themselves, who thinks they're lovable, unlikable, not in a narcissistic way, just in a stable, secure way, right? Unfortunately, though, that sort of thing is quite rare, right? I like to say that's more common probably in a Disneyland version of life, right? Because what is more common is the 2 to 4-year-old will wander into the living room and see mum crying for whatever reason, right? Now, let's say mum's crying at a sad movie, right? The 2-year-old will falsely believe that he's caused that to happen. He or she's caused that to happen, right? And they begin to feel fearful because they deep down, don't forget, they don't have the language, right? But deep down, there's a belief forming, and it usually manifests itself as feelings. I caused this to happen. So first of all, maybe if you could translate the feelings into words, it'd be, what's happening here? Oh, this is happening. Mum's crying. Okay. Why is she crying? Well, I am responsible for everything in the world, so I must have made this happen. So what type of person does that make me? A bad person. Yeah. And if there's no sort of reparation around that, if mum doesn't turn around and say, "Hey, it's okay, babe, it's all good," right? But that feeling stays there, basically, and it just sits there. And that feeling is part of the false belief that I caused this bad thing to happen, right? Let's take it a little bit further. So let's say 2-year-old walks in to the living room and sees mum and dad arguing, right? So again, the 2-year-old believing that they are responsible for everything in the world, believe that they caused this argument to happen. And mum might be crying and dad might be shouting, and there's high conflict going on, right? And the 2-year-old believes that they caused it to happen, right? And again, if there's no sort of, reparation, if there's no, "It's okay, babe, come here, and love and compassion," then the 2-year-old will continue to believe it's them that caused that, right? And it can be reinforced, that false belief can be reinforced by, something like, "Go to bed, get back to bed," So that cold tone of voice, it's all about tone of voice as well, right? That cold tone of voice just reinforces that, right? Now, if it's an infrequent thing, fair enough. I mean, it's happened to all of us, the infrequent thing. But if it's a consistent thing, right, throughout, especially between the ages of 2 to 4, then that belief just keeps on getting reinforced, right? And and it tends to, I like to say, it tends to sit at the basis of the adult psyche because it goes through to adulthood, right? And 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 so basically, if it's a consistent high conflictual house, right? Um, and the 2-year-old believes they are responsible, that belief strengthens into, I'm responsible for making bad things happen, so therefore I'm a bad person, right? Um, and the same happens again, if parents are drinking, drug taking, whatever, any sort of destabilization within the household, right? They believe they are responsible for that, that they take it on board, right? And that just reinforces, I'm responsible for these bad things happening, so therefore I'm a bad person, right? Um, and just some other stuff around there as well. If mom and dad are drunk, taking drugs around a kid as well, um, then the kid will feel that. And if you can interpret the feelings and put them into words, um, the feelings will probably say something like, aren't I valuable enough for you to be sober around me? So that's another thing as well. That's just in the same territory as the false belief I'm a bad person, you know, and they sort of reinforcing each other. I'm not valuable enough for parents to not drink around me. And also I cause these bad things to happen, right? And if there's lots of shouting towards the child as well, it's just reinforcing that. So the child may begin to develop coping strategies. So what sort of coping strategies would a child develop who believes, if they believe they're a bad person for causing these bad things to happen? Well, one common coping strategy is people pleasing, right? So basically a child needs to survive, right? So they can grow up and have babies and perpetuate the human species, right? So in order to survive, you need to have people around you to protect you, parents and what have you, right? So the child will begin to, one of the strategies a child develops is people pleasing. So just going overboard. And again, if you could interpret their feelings, put words to their feelings, probably be something like, I have no value because I'm a bad person. So who's going to want me? Who's going to love me? Who's going to, accept me? Who's going to like me? And so I'll have to sort of buy their love, if you like, and in other words, I'll have to do so much for somebody, then eventually, hopefully, they will want me. It's almost like the kid is a diamond, an actual diamond, right? The kid is a diamond, and in their hand they have diamonds, and they're all diamond, and the kid is actually very, very valuable, just like a diamond, right? But the kid begins to view themselves as a piece of coal, no value at all. When in fact, and that's a completely false belief, a false self-perception of themselves, but that's how the kid views themselves. Does that make sense? And people pleasing.
Talking to my soul. This is me talking to me. It's something I'm dealing with right now, my codependency.
Really? Okay.
So you're talking, you're talking to me, like, you just described me down to the T.
Okay. I appreciate that. Yeah. Me too. Yeah. Very common. Yeah. Very deep, hey? Yeah. So people pleasing is one strategy. Like I said, the kid is a diamond, but they see themselves as a piece of coal, and unfortunately, this can go through to teenage years and adulthood, and where unfortunately narcissistic people will come along and see that their person is a diamond, but make them believe they're a piece of coal, and the people pleaser will just keep on giving to the narcissistic. But often the people pleaser will take a narcissistic partner, right? A narcissistic partner will just take and take and take and take and take. And why would an adult who's been through that sort of childhood, which developed them into a people pleaser, why would they, have a relationship with a narcissistic person who just takes and takes and takes? Well, it's because in childhood, that's all they know. That's what, our parents are providers of love, right? And as little kids, we are instinctively driven to see our parents as providers of love, the perfect providers of love. And however they behave, that's what love must be, because they are providers of love, right? And then we just remember what their behaviors are like, right? And people of different personalities have different micro expressions, right? Different behaviors, very subtle, and we go looking for those similar behaviors in our adult relationships, So we actually go looking for, someone who's very like our parents, who behaves and has similar facial expressions and what have you. And we find them. You could be in a room with 499 normal, non-narcissistic people, guaranteed, right? A person who's been brought up with narcissistic parents will find the narcissist in the room and be attracted to them, right? And so, okay, and they'll continue. And what they're actually doing is that relationship of the narcissistic partner replicates their childhood of the people pleaser. So the people pleaser just the behaviors keeps on getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. Okay, that's one trajectory from a traumatic childhood, right? A second trajectory from a traumatic childhood is narcissism. So narcissism is another sort of coping strategy, right? And again, it's subconscious, right? And so basically the child believes that they are, if it's in a high conflict environment, right? The child believes that they are unlovable. Deep down, they really believe they are responsible for all these bad things that are happening. Number 2 to 4, they think they're responsible. They think they're falsely responsible for all this bad stuff. So they really do think they are a very, very bad person, totally unlovable, totally unacceptable, generally. And so what they do is subconsciously they say, right, how can I make myself acceptable? Because I need to survive. I need to be around people, but I'm a bad person. I know people like strong people, so I'll be strong even if I have to fake it. But what they do is it's like a compensation, because they believe they're a bad person. They believe they're weak. They believe they're stupid and all of this stuff, right? So what they do is they overcompensate, and I'll make myself strong, right? I'll never be weak ever. I'll never look weak, because people like strong people. But what they do is they overcompensate. So they never apologize, because apologizing is weakness. They're very stubborn, often very dogmatic. It's all about them. It's their way or the highway. And so basically, it's trying to show strength, right? And they despise weakness, but it's actually they're despising themselves, because deep down they believe they are weak, right? So they're actually projecting their own issues, and they'll often find people who will love them unconditionally, right? And that's a people pleaser. Yeah, but they'll just take and take and take from the people pleaser, and they don't give anything back. And then they discard the people pleaser, and they get another one. And they often have a stable of people pleasers. Yeah, because they're always trying to keep their options open, because deep down they believe they'll always be abandoned, because deep down they believe they're a bad person. So that's why they'll have several partners, often on the go at the same time. And they tend to monkey branch, which means swinging from one branch to another, swinging from one partner, going from one partner to another, because they're terrified of being alone. Yeah.
I have a question with about kids between ages 2 and 4 and divorce that happens in that age.
Yeah.
Obviously very traumatic, and the kid's going to think that it's their fault. For those that do unfortunately go through divorce, and their kids are between 2 and 4, what can they do to ensure that their children, or isn't going to think that it's their fault for that moment through to the rest of their life?
Okay. I think there has to be lots of compassion, just lots of love from both parents, which unfortunately is it's so common these days to have conflictual parents in separations and what have you, you know, and there's lots of destabilization. So the opposite of that, really. So parents don't argue in front of the child because they think they are responsible for that. Try and not bring your issues, you know, in front of the child, and lots of loving, compassion, and try and minimize destabilization. So, you know, sort of seeing one parent one week, one parent the next week. Okay, that takes some adjusting, right? But try and maintain routine. Children need routine. They need structure, right? It helps them feel safe. And also another thing as well is don't always give in to the child, right? That makes the child feel insecure. So if you think of parents a bit like, say, parents are a bit like a barrier to the threats of the outside world, right? I like to think of parents like a bit like a wall, you know, and the kids will often, you often see this, the kids will hide behind the legs, right, of the parents, if there's a dog over there or something, right? So the parents are like a protective barrier, right? And if you have two parents, that's like, and they get along very, very well, that's like quite a strong barrier. And if the parents have each other's back, right? And so by that, what I mean is if a child says, "Oh, can I have a biscuit, Dad?" and you know, Dad looks at Mum and Mum goes, "No, no, this gonna have his dinner in a minute," you know, and so they both agree, "No, you can't have a biscuit," you know, and so that helps the child feel more secure. It means the barrier is intact, right? And the kid will often, we use the phrase testing the barrier, right? The kid will often test the barrier and try and drive a wedge in between Mum and Dad. It's testing the integrity of the barrier, right? You know, because it's there to protect the children from a threat to the outside world, right? And so the child will test it. And so that it's really important that the parents are together and aligned in their views, and they don't play off each other, which unfortunately playing off each other is very common these days. But yeah, so align in views, try and minimize destabilization, structure, routine, really important, lots of compassion, talking with their child, and really reinforcing that whatever happens, it's not their fault, really. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've all traumatized our children, how do we go forward from here to try and heal that?
Okay.
Say we reflect now and we're like, all right, between the ages of 2 and 4, I did do this, I did do that, blah, blah, blah. I can now see certain behaviors. The child might not be emotionally mature enough to change those behaviors themselves. So what can we as parents do to try and heal that
Are you talking
period?
about in childhood, in teenage years?
So, yeah. So heal our children. So while they're still growing and maturing and becoming emotionally mature,
Okay.
what can we do as parents to implement healing for our children for the trauma that they may have picked up between the ages of 2 and 4?
Okay. I think one of the best things to do really is to do some research and, you know, there's loads of information out there at the moment, right? There's YouTube videos, there's books you can read, and it's about really taking ownership for your child's welfare, you know? So even before you have the baby, you know, read up on this stuff, read up on childhood development and what have you, and find out yourself what you can do about it, what you can do with your child, right? That's one thing. There's lots of information out there, right? And two, try and find a really good child's therapist, counselor, psychologist, preferably one that comes with recommendations. Word of mouth is very powerful. And, you know, if you want to have some family, don't just leave. I would recommend don't just leave the child with the psychologist. I would recommend a bit of family therapy with both parents, and there's a family unit, so to have a bit of family therapy, so everyone feels a bit heard, and you know the parents can be educated as well at the same time.
What about we now as adults that trauma happened between 2 and 4? What can we do now? Is that just internal work?
Okay. So I think first of all, you know, we have to acknowledge that everyone is traumatized, right? Everyone is traumatized. It's not a new thing. It's been around since, you know, life began, right? And trauma, as far as I'm concerned, basically means an adaptation, right? To change for survival reasons. Sometimes they're good adaptations, sometimes they're not so good, right? And basically, generally in human beings, trauma is experienced as you have an event, and let's say a 3-year-old comes into the living room, falls over, bangs their head on a table, is in fear and pain, and maybe mom and dad aren't around for whatever reason, and that fear response stays on, right? It doesn't switch off, but it gets suppressed, and the child eventually soothes themselves, right? That's a trauma. It's a switched on fear response which doesn't get turned off, right? And it, we all have. I mean, birth, massive, right? But we are very resilient. Our ancestors would have lived through very hostile times, and they had, future generations. So we've inherited resilience, so we can cope with a lot, right? A lot of trauma, if you like. It's just that if there's consistent trauma and there's very little reparation, especially in childhood, that's when things start getting a bit difficult, really. Sometimes there's what's called complex trauma, which develops, right? And this is like trauma after trauma, or fear response after fear response after fear response, sort of compounding, right? And you may have individual traumas, isolated traumas, like say a parental separation, or some other thing which has happened in childhood. But generally, the childhood was good. Generally, the child felt loved by their parents, and life was harmonious. But there might just be some trauma there in the background, isolated. So with complex trauma, there are not medical advice. I do stress, right? There are things like SGB, which we've talked about previously.
Can you just what SGB stand for again?
Stellate ganglion block. But I want to stress that's not medical advice. And
put a link to the Stella Centre Australia down below. They deal with SGB here in Australia. I will be doing a podcast with Nora, the head of the Australia Stella Centre, to go further into that if you do want more information.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's okay. And again, not medical advice. There is things like CBD oil, which has been found to be helpful for traumatic stress. There's legal, it depends how much you want to spend, unfortunately, but there's legal psychedelic retreats, which people can go to, and there's doctors and medical staff there, and the psychedelics have been found to be very useful for childhood trauma, things like that. So these sort of broad-based treatments can help, with complex trauma. Another one is yoga. Yoga has been found to be the most effective treatment beyond anything ever prescribed. That's from Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the Bible on trauma called The Body Keeps the Score.
Okay.
But for individual traumas, really, you still remember things, or it's just like coming from a particular part of your life, Ian,
So like a car accident.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say you have a car accident when you're a kid, right? And you're still remembering it, for some reason you're having nightmares about it. Or it could be like a parental separation. It could be an abuse memory. It could be an assault when you were a kid. It could have been
a dog attack.
That's a good example. Yeah, like a dog attack, right? So, so basically, there's something called EMDR, right? Which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I've been doing EMDR now with clients for over 10 years, since about 2014, right? And I was very lucky. I was trained by the most experienced person in Australia who's been doing EMDR for about 40 years. And when I went to her practice, she said, "You're going to do EMDR for clients, and you have to experience it yourself, so you know what you're talking about." And so I was astounded, actually. She said to me, "Think of a trauma in your life," and I did. I thought of something around my father's death. And I had some guilt around that because he was ill, and we had an argument before he died, and I felt some guilt around that. And within 10 minutes, basically, of doing EMDR, and I just seen my dad, a visual representation of my dad. I had my eyes closed, forgiving me. I was astonished. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life, really. And then a few weeks after that, the boss of the clinic where I was, her and her father, who's also very experienced in EMDR, they said, think of the worst thing you've ever experienced in your life, the worst trauma. And I said, okay, I've got this trauma. And within 2 hours of doing EMDR, I did 2 hours of EMDR solidly. And I'd actually totally reframed that trauma. It was phenomenal. Basically, the trauma was I'd watched a movie called The Exorcist when I was about 10, and I couldn't sleep for most of my teens and 20s. I was having nightmares all the time and all that stuff. So very severe trauma. And I even used to get really uneasy around dark wood, which featured a lot in the movie. I couldn't even talk like this I couldn't even say the word exorcist, to be honest with you. I'd even avoid words like exit, anything with the EX on the beginning, you know. And I was always looking at the newspapers to see whether it was going to be on TV, you know. So I was, and if I heard the soundtrack of the Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, I couldn't even say that, right?
Well, I had similar, but not as deep and as much as that. But the movie Scream.
Okay.
For like, even my stepdad even tells me, he's like, for like 6 weeks after you slept with a knife under your pillow, you couldn't sleep.
Really?
There was a tree touching my window, so I'd think that people were trying to get in.
Yeah.
It was like, because I saw it when I was probably like 9 years old, something like that.
Horrific, right?
I went around a friend's place,
Yeah.
and then, still friends with him today. And his mum, who I try now call mum, was like, "Oh, you allowed to watch scary movies?" I was like, "Yeah, I've never seen one before in my life," and it was Scream. Oh, yeah,
horrific.
But haven't been scared from a movie since.
Right. Okay.
So,
okay.
Like I don't like horror or scary movies now, purely because they bore me.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
but no, that's fine. That's fine. But they don't affect you like the one did. Yeah. Okay. That's resilience too, right? So I went for years, like, you know, and when I finally got to this, it's called Brisbane Counselling Centre where I was working, and it's known for it. That's mostly what they do there is EMDR. And so I went round to the boss's father's house, and just amazing. Hey, he just sat me down. He said, think of the worst thing, worst trauma you've ever been affected by. You still think about it. Basically, 2 hours, and basically I had my eyes closed, and because there's different types of ways of doing EMDR. I was listening to beeps going from side to side, which weirdly makes your eyes move from side to side. And when your eyes are moving from side to side, right, your eye movements are connected to your memory and emotional centers, right? All that physiology behind the eye, the nerves and what have you, connected to your memory and emotional centers, right? And for some reason, eyes moving from side to side at a particular speed influences your emotional and visual memory centers, right? It's a bit like REM sleep when you're sleeping, you know, eyes moving. Well, it's a bit like that, right? And I was astonished, right? So basically, in the beginning, I was thinking about the movie, and I was seeing all these horrible things because that's sort of, you go into the memory of the trauma. But anyway, you know, having someone there really helped, you know, and all those horrible things passed. And it's a bit like, and I was feeling the stress associated with it as well. So it was almost like, you know, I was going up in intensity of the feeling, right? And then something really amazing happened. I started I could see myself flying through the sky, through clouds. I'm like, where's this going? You know, I had my eyes closed, and it's a totally subconscious experience. I didn't intend any of this to happen. And next thing is, I'm visualizing a movie studio. And it was clear as day. Hey, I had my eyes closed. It was like a bit like a dream. And I'm in a movie studio. And how did I know I was in a movie studio? Because I sort of, in my mind's eye, I looked down. I could see these cables, these electric cables everywhere. And then I noticed TV cameras and movie studio and lights and everything. And I was so detailed. Hey, what the hell is my brain was producing the resolution for me? And then I saw the bed in the Exorcist movie. And I saw the actor, Linda Gray. I couldn't say that. I would never be able to say that, right? None of that stuff. And then I saw the actress, and I just got this instruction from my own mind: go and give Linda a hug. So I did in my mind. You know, I visualized giving her a hug. She had all the makeup on and everything for the movie. And then I took her up to heaven and let her go. And that was it. It took 2 hours. And that was the worst trauma I've ever had in my life. And I was just like, I was mind blown, right? Um, I was just astonished at how powerful EMDR is, really. Just absolutely phenomenal. So basically, when I talked about, to link it back to trauma, when I said before, trauma is basically a fear response that stays on, right? And trauma actually means a wound, right? So I imagine a trauma, if you depict it as a shape, it's a bit like, say, a circle, and you have the fear response. I have the event there, right? So it's like a three-quarter circle, fear response on, and there's no closure, there's a gap, because if the fear response was switched off by mom, dad, whatever, getting some love, then it's almost like it's switched off and the circle is complete, and we have what's called a completion event, or say closure, don't we? Right. But in a trauma, there's no closure. It's almost like there's a wound, there's a gap, and it stays on. So in EMDR, what happens is the brain actually the EMDR helps the brain come up with its own resolution, right, to close off that gap. So you get closure, which I was just blown away by. And they call EMDR healing on warp speed. It's excellent. It's really good for one-off traumas that you're still bothered by. You know, maybe you have the visual component, or you have if you're not visual, if you're visually impaired, maybe you have there's an audible component, or some sort of feeling in there. But basically, it's very good for one-off traumas. Yeah, it's really good. It can be. It's not for everybody, because, you know, I said before, I was, you know, in the initial stages of seeing all these things that were stressing me out. So it's a bit like a roller coaster. You go up and oh my god, and then you come down. And typically, in when I'm working with people and I talk about EMDR, what I'll tend to do is if they have a particularly isolated trauma that is particularly bothering them, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, what about if we just approach that very gradually? So in the first session, I'll just gradually introduce them to EMDR. I'll say, just maybe come up, if your trauma is the big one, then maybe that's a 10 out of 10 of stress. Maybe if we just get used to it, and give me an example of something that stresses you out 1 out of 10 to a level of 1 out of 10. And then we'll just deal with that. And it could be, I don't know, the dog's chewed my shoes or something like that, right? And I'm a bit pissed off with that. Okay. And maybe we do 2 or 3 1 out of 10s. And then the following week, we might do 2 or 3 3 out of 10s. Then we might go to 5 out of 10. And then maybe a 7. And we can take as long as we want, you know. And then eventually, when the person wants to, we do the big one, you know.
Can you explain the process of EMDR? Like, what is the individual doing?
Oh, okay. So basically, do you mean if they would come to my practice?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So essentially, it's all to do with eye movement, right? So for some reason, I'll give you a bit of history, right? So it was discovered by fluke, right? As a lady called Francine Shapiro in I think about the 1980s or late 70s. 1980s. As far as I'm aware, it's a bit anecdotal. She was wandering around a park or something somewhere in the States, and she was experiencing a bit of a traumatic memory and an intensity of a feeling associated with the memory. And then something made her eyes move from side to side, and I don't know what that was. It could have been a flock of birds or something. But she noticed there was a decrease in the intensity of feeling, just a slight decrease, you know. And she became intrigued by this, you know, because it seemed to be like a lasting change. You know? It didn't return to into the same level as it had been, the feeling. And so she looked into it, and I think she was at university and she was studying a PhD in a particular subject, but she changed it to psychology, I think, and it's like more of a neural-based PhD research. And as far as I'm concerned, what she uncovered was basically the equivalent of uncovering the Kobe diamond in psychology and neuroscience. And what she discovered was eye movements. Your eyes are linked to your memory and emotional centers. And eye moving from side to side, when your eyes move from side to side at a certain speed, that somehow is associated with the development of some sort of resolution to a trauma. And it's an involuntary movement. It's an involuntary movement from side to side, right? And for some reason, this sort of is these movements is sort of like the catalyst for getting resolution in these isolated traumas. And resolution meaning, coming up with some sort of thought, belief, whatever it is. And you feel it deep down, like it could be a visual one, like I told you about Linda Gray, right? Or it could be just a thought pops into your mind, like it is what it is. Another example, which is very common, is I was treated badly. That doesn't make me a bad boy. So then the person actually comes up with these, and they're quite surprised when they, oh my God, I was treated badly. But that doesn't make me a bad boy. So they come up and they get these rational beliefs that sort of, it's almost like the core belief is altered. Mm-hmm. The core belief that this person has had for years around this particular trauma, they developed a false belief like that was my fault, and that gets changed. It's just phenomenal. So, okay, let's take it a little bit further. So in traditional EMDR, what happens is a therapist will use the fingers and guide the client's eyes. Then the client follows the therapist's fingers at a particular speed, right? And when I went to Brisbane Counselling Centre, they weren't doing this, right? Which I'm somewhat relieved about, really, because it's quite tiring doing this, and you can get a sore shoulder and stuff. So they had headphones, right? Because someone had discovered that basically when listening to tones going from ear to ear, going beep, 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 like this, it does
binaural beats?
No, I'll come on to that. Basically, it's called bilateral stimulation. So basically, that's what eye movements are, actually. Another expression for EMDR is bilateral stimulation. A stimulus is something outside of your body that stimulates something to happen inside of your body. So if I had your favorite food here, that would stimulate your saliva, right? Okay, so basically, bilateral stimulation is when something which goes from side to side, bilateral, right, causes something to happen inside of your body, right? Like relaxation or a memory to start being resolved, if you like, right? So in traditional EMDR, the fingers are moved by the therapist like this, and the client follows the fingers, right? But the other thing is with that, the client can get tired and what have you. So when I went to Brisbane Counselling Centre, anyway, they had these special units, like machines, EMDR machines, and a big part of that was headphones, and you listen to tones, right? That's also bilateral stimulation. Bilateral stimulation can be visual, auditory, as well as tactile. It's almost like someone came along and said, what about people who are visually impaired? They can't see this, so why don't we have tones, right? And weirdly, really weirdly, right, you hear this bilateral stimulation going on, right? Your eyes begin to move. And so typically the client's eyelids are closed, and you can see their eyeballs moving underneath their eyelids from side to side. From side to side, right? And it's weird. And they'll actually often say, my eyes are moving from side to side, and it's involuntary, right? So you get the eye movements going, and then they begin to get the resolution, right? It's amazing.
Okay, so...
And they don't even notice they're moving then.
It's funny because while you've been talking, I've closed my eyes several times and tried moving. You can't, when you are consciously moving them, you can't move them that quick.
No, you can't, can you?
Like, it's a slow movement. Like, if you try it, it's a really slow movement. So you'd need to be a subconscious movement.
Right, and it's tiring too, right? And you've got other things to take care of consciously. So it's difficult to just focus on moving your eyes, and it's tiring, right? Consciously, it's tiring. So what's really amazing is when people are listening to the tones, because that's how I do it in my office. We have headphones, right? And they're listening to tones with their eyes closed. What's really amazing is some may become aware that their eyes are moving, and then they just forget it. Yeah, they're just starting to they go into the processing of the trauma. Other people aren't aware that their eyes are moving, But it's amazing to watch that, So I tend to use tones to answer your question. That's what it looks like. I've just bought some EMDR equipment over the weekend. I've had it before, and I've just bought an updated version. And this is basically a light bar, so the person can watch the light flickering from side to side. Like that's replacing the fingers. It comes with headphones, so you can hear beep, 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 which is at the same frequency as the light bar. And there's also vibrating paddles as well. So basically these also alternately vibrate in your hands, right? Because bilateral stimulation, which is the main mechanism in an EMDR, right? To get the eyes moving from side to side. So that's what the stimulus is for. It's to get the eye movements going from side to side. So you can either have visual, like a light bar, fingers, tones, or vibrating paddles. And in all three, it gets the eye movements going from side to side. The eye movements are somehow fundamental in the resolution of trauma memories. They're connected to the emotional sense of the brain. And for some reason, it just helps to resolve trauma
We
memories.
don't know why.
There are
Theories.
no, the strongest one, it's just similar to REM sleep, and it just helps to reprocess memories.
Because when you first mentioned it, my first thought was like when someone's talking to you and I can't remember which is true, but like if they look to the top left, they're recalling memory. If they look to the top right, they're making stuff up, and which is obviously like linked to the memory as well. So that was my initial thought into that.
Do you know what? I think that's in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
That's in the same ballpark, definitely. I think that was first noticed in NLP, in neuro-linguistic programming. And there's actually, it's like the position of the eye, right? So like, they'll actually look off somewhere. And definitely eye movement, or rather eye position, eyeball position is linked to memory there, right? The fundamental difference there with the EMDR is there's continuous movement. There's a continuous movement to the eyeballs. There is actually an advanced version of EMDR called brain spotting. Have you heard of this? This is pretty cool. It touches on what you just said, actually. There's no eye movement. So this was discovered, but it's for trauma. This was discovered by a therapist called David Grand, right? And he'd been working with, I think, at a very high level athlete. I don't know if she was Olympic level or whatever, but it's very high level ice skater, right? And every week she was doing EMDR because she couldn't do a triple jump, right? Which is what she needed to do to go to the next level. Sorry, to go to the next level. So every week they were doing EMDR because, I think, I don't know, maybe the reasoning was she'd had a childhood trauma, maybe she'd fallen over. And the reason why she couldn't do the triple jump because she was protecting herself. Triple jump, I should say.
Fear and in her head.
Yeah, based on maybe an earlier trauma. And she'd been doing EMDR for maybe a year, right? And they were doing really well, right? And I've actually seen this with clients, right? When I was doing the hand movements, right? And you notice something really, it's just like incredible, really. If you pay attention as you're doing the eye, supposed to got their eyes open, you might see the eyeball wobble, one eyeball just wobble slightly, right? And it's like really interesting, right? And that's what he noticed. He noticed as he was doing these slow finger movements from side to side, he noticed the eyeball wobble. And so when he got the fingers to a particular position in space and the person was focused, the client's eyeball began to wobble. So one day he just decided to keep his fingers there. He stopped doing this and he just kept his fingers there. And he said, just look at my fingers. So the wobble is in line with his fingers. And next thing is, boom, she just released all verbally this trauma that they've been looking for in EMDR, right? And something which happened when she was a kid and they went really deep and she released all the trauma. And then she did the triple jump the next day.
So the wobble is slight movement, very, very
minute
minuscule.
Movement. So basically, when he was holding his finger in a particular position in space, that's which coincided with the wobble, right? That's he reasoned the brain in the client's brain was trying to communicate something, and that's why it was wobbling. He's like almost like saying, just hold your finger there. And I can release it. If I just look at that I can release this trauma, right? So from there, he developed a technique called brain spotting. And what he reasoned was basically for every spot in space, like pixels, right? if you imagine like a load of pixels, like a TV screen, there's an equivalent in your memory, right? And a pixel in your memory, like a brain spot, some of them may contain traumas, right? So basically, if you can find the position, like the mirror equivalent of a like, for want of a better word, a pixel or a brain spot in your memory, right? You can trigger it, for want of a better word, or activate it. It just releases the trauma. It's amazing, and it feels like, because I'm trained in brain spotting too, and it feels like a bathtub draining of dirty water. It's a phenomenal experience. Yeah, it's really good.
Have you?
So that's an advanced version of EMDR.
I'm correlating the two, and I'm hearing this slight, tiny movement in a wobble, and this huge movement. Have you experimented with the distance at which someone moves their eye? Do you go from complete right to complete left? Could you focus? You know what I mean? Have you experimented?
Are you talking about brain spotting?
With EMDR.
With
can you do smaller left to right movements that isn't? Have you done like experiments like that to try and figure out? Do I need to go completely over there to there? Can I don't know.
I think it's a really interesting question. Actually, it's a really good question to ask. With EMDR, I'll say no, because I use the tones.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Okay. And the person has their eyes closed. But with brain spotting, yeah. So with brain spotting, basically yes. So what you do is, what I do is, I'll normally have a pen, right, or some sort of wand, right, and I'll just move the wand very carefully, very slowly, very deliberately, and you just look for signs, very subtle signs. It could be like it's not just the wobble. It could be any facial shift. So it could be a nod. It could be an eye movement like that, or your eyebrow movement, this, or it could be just some sort of twitch, like a poker tell, just some sort of tell, and then I'll just hold it there and I'll say, okay, how's that feel for you now? Oh, it's the intensity of the feeling I'm experiencing is increased. If I move it like the belt, it's gone down. Move it that way, gone down. But just here, it's increased, and then we might just stay there for a little bit until that intent, and the person just looks at the pen in that position and space, and it goes down. The intensity goes down, just like the ice skater story. So when I was telling the ice skater story, David Grant was looking at an eye wobble. But actually, then he developed it. It's any sort of movement. It could be a body movement that you look for as you're moving the pen, or the wand, or it could be a wobble in the eye. It could be a twitch. It's a bit like a poker tell. You just see the person just change. It could be the hand moves or something like that, and then it sort of seems to coincide with an increase in intensity of the feeling around the trauma that's being processed with brain spotting. So it's really interesting to watch. And you can go all the way out, by the way, to answer your question. Yes, you can go all the way out.
Yeah.
You might not have any sort of activation, close. Then all of a sudden, got all the way out. And sometimes I've worked with clients where they'll be sitting. I'll be in a big room, right, and like say like this, right, and I'll be maybe a meter away with the wand. Too intense, but I'll have to take my chair to the other side of the room. And the person can look at the wand from maybe 5 or 6 meters away, and then they can deal with the intensity, and it's just amazing.
My curious mind,
yeah.
I like thinking. So my curious mind, even just with the thought you just brought then, I wonder if depends on the person's vision, like how clear their vision is. So them moving away, so maybe they're like a bit blurrier, or they're more farsighted, so they have to get like the focus correct as well.
I think that's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
And then I wonder if where they look, if it correlates to a certain part of their life. It's in like maybe top left hand, like 0 to 1 year old trauma, and then like that quarter is 0 to 1, and then maybe the top right hand corner, those pixels over there are 20 to 24 year old, or like I wonder if they're like, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
You know what? I'm completely open to stuff like that.
Like when you do with your clients, are you recording whereabouts they were looking? Like,
yes.
So then I wonder if you went back through all of those clients and you were like, oh, this.
Oh, do you mean it's like, okay, yeah.
If these clients here had a trauma to do with dog attacks, and it just so look at your through your records, and you're like, they all look to the top left-hand corner.
That's a really interesting point, actually. That's a really interesting point.
And like you can maybe start. So then
that's a very interesting.
Because if you start piecing together that information, I don't know, there might be people around the world doing it, and someone comes to you, a client comes to you, and it's like, I have sexual trauma. And you go, all right, well, I've got 15 clients that have had sexual trauma, never looked at the bottom right, so I'm going to start with my stuff down the bottom right.
Interesting. That's a really. I've got a suggestion for you, actually. The most experienced brain spotting person in Australia is a wonderful person called Robbie Abel.
Okay.
And she could probably contribute to that answer.
Okay.
She trained me.
Okay, cool.
She's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, cool.
And that would be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'd like to be on that.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, because
awesome.
That's a question that's never really occurred to me, and that'd be really interesting.
I don't know. It might be nothing. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm open to this stuff. I mean, because I don't think we can shut our minds off to possibilities. Hey, we have to be open-minded.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I wonder, once again, because I'm big into sound and frequencies and universe and stuff, the beats, the frequency of the beat, the megahertz of the beat. So like there are certain frequencies that are healing frequencies and stuff out there. So maybe the frequency of the beats you're playing might also contribute to the healing factor that's going on. That's a really good point as well. That's a very good point. I've actually noticed something on that. It's well worth looking into that. I think I'll look into that. It's a piece of research, perhaps. I've noticed that because I have this EMDR unit, right, and it has like speed of the beep, beep beep, and also volume. So basically frequency, speed, right? And I've noticed that some people prefer like faster, some people prefer slower, and so on and so forth. And it just helps them to process their trauma. That's the EMDR stuff. That's EMDR. It helps them to process their trauma. Can you change the hertz of the beat? So I actually have bilateral deafness. It's a diagnosed condition. Right. I don't really know what that means. When I did a bunch of hearing tests, I came out with tinnitus and bilateral deafness and stuff. So but I know there's certain frequencies, especially the higher the frequency, the less I can hear, especially in my left ear. So like it's good there is a way to change that, because if it was a high frequency thing, I might not hear it. So, okay. But yeah, it's also good. When I say frequency, what I mean is, when I say frequency, what I mean is the frequency of the bilateral rather than the wavelength. Yep. Yeah, it's the frequency. Like beep, I mean, like, like the beep itself could be beep or could be bop. So that there. That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Bop, 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 bop might bring out some different things too. Beep, 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 beep. That's interesting. Yeah, that's it. That's it. An excellent point, actually. Because if you think about like meditations, chanting, all that stuff, like all that stuff that can bring out your trauma. Like you're doing internal work, so if it might be worth looking into that. Absolutely, yeah, because there are certain frequencies, right, like the Schumann resonance and what have you. Exactly. Om. Is Om the same as Schumann? I don't know. Well, the Om frequency. Schumann is the Earth's frequency. Om is, I think, the universe frequency. Right. Okay. So that'd be really interesting to see if that could be incorporated. Hey, like even in a bilateral sense. Yeah. Like bop, beep, bop, beep, bop. Like there'd be so many different experiments to. That's such a good idea to look into, actually. Well, even with one of your clients, I don't know if once they get healed, do they keep coming back? Yeah. I don't know, but start doing one person bop, 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 bop. See if it heals anything. If not, like there'd be a whole array. Like a big study might need to go into this. I don't know. It's so interesting. Yeah, because sound and frequency within the sound, it does seem. And same as the vibrations. Yeah. Right. Yeah. What I was going to say was though, with sound, right? I mean, our brain behaves so differently, like with music, right? On different wavelengths, different frequencies, right? Like it can alter your mood just like that, right? You can listen to, I mean, that's why one of the reasons they have soundtracks on movies, right? It's because it influences how you feel about a particular thing, like horror movies, comedies, things like that. So you've raised a really interesting point, actually. Yeah, cool. Excellent. Awesome. That's what these discussions are about, aren't they? Yeah, fascinating. So we can learn. Absolutely. Good area of research. Provoke thought. Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for discussing relationships, trauma, EMDR. I'm definitely intrigued about EMDR and brain spotting. I'm going to look further into that. I definitely think you guys should as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, share, comment, do whatever you can, especially if you like the episode and the information that we're bringing across. Matt, until next time, thank you kindly.
Joel. No
Cheers.
worries. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.